What's the secret to building a high caliber, close-knit team as your agency grows? Growing isn't just about numbers. It's about growing in a way that keeps your team engaged, connected, and delivering their best work. In today's episode, we're getting into what it takes to build a strong, scalable culture that keeps your team purpose-driven and focused. I'm joined by Victoria Gray, COO of Conversion Digital, an agency that's doubled its size under her leadership while maintaining a high-performing, purpose-driven vibe. We'll get into 3 core principles that help to keep a team connected, aligned, and motivated as you grow. Learn about a unique growth committee model that lets employees connect with multiple leaders for mentorship, building a sense of shared purpose and top performance, and how to empower your team to make impactful decisions without needing constant oversight. If you're looking to build a dynamic, motivated team, this episode is packed with practical tips to help you grow while staying true to your agency's core values. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Small But Mighty Agency podcast. If you want to grow an agency to 7 figures and beyond without working more hours in your business, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Audrey Joy Kwan. I know what it takes to build an agency, including supporting an agency owner in selling and exiting. I also have a master's degree in communications, specializing in organizational development. My team and I have worked behind the scenes of multiple 7-figure agencies and have coached and consulted with over 150 agency owners. All this to say, when you join us on the Small But Mighty Agency podcast, you get real-world experience and practical tips that help you work less, earn more, and lead with integrity. So let's go. Hey friends, welcome back to the Small But Mighty Agency podcast. I'm really excited to have Victoria Gray with me today. She's the COO of Conversion Digital, a boutique agency that's all about email, push, and SMS marketing. Over the past 5 years, under Victoria's leadership, the agency has doubled in size, growing to a team of 40. But here's the thing, they've managed to keep that close-knit, small agency vibe that so many lose as they expand. In this episode, we're going to chat about how she's done that and the steps she's taken to maintain that small agency feel, even as the team grows. As you know, we dive right into the good stuff, so let's get right into it. Victoria, how would you describe the small agency vibe?
That's the tricky part, isn't it? I think it's really different for different agencies, but we spent some time thinking about what that meant for us, and we sort of landed on 3 things. So the first was a shared sense of purpose. So when you're in a small company, everyone's in it, you're working together, you're working hard, driving towards the same thing. The second thing was transparency. So when you're one of 5 or 8 people, everyone kind of knows everything. There isn't much that happens that people don't know or hear about. And then the third thing is building and maintaining those meaningful connections with your colleagues. And that's probably where we spent most of our efforts.
Victoria, I love the 3 characteristics that you just pulled up. So sharing a sense of purpose, transparency, and meaningful connections. What are you currently doing in your agency to maintain that as you grow?
We want to be more than just a viable business. You know, our purpose is beyond just making money and growing. It's more about creating an environment where people can thrive personally and professionally. So I think that's one of the things that our leadership team is really passionate about. It's about the people and the employees and the work that we do.
You have been in the agency space for over 20 years, and you've worked for small agencies. You've worked for, of course, now a larger agency. What do you think is the difference between the small agency versus the large agency?
I was one of 12 when I was hired at my previous job, and I was one of 20 when I was hired at Conversion. And, you know, I really loved the level of passion of the owners and the leadership team. It takes a lot of grit and determination and effort to start a business and to grow it and to make it viable. So I really loved the heart that kind of goes into building a company and building an agency. And the people that thrive in that type of environment are my type of people. They like to work on a lot of different things, and they like to understand the why behind what they're doing, and they like to do good work. But yeah, and I feel like at the times when I was joining those companies as well, you know, it was young and agency life. Like, we like to have fun and we like to go out, and, you know, you really get a nice sense of community at work. So I think that's one of the things that I loved about that small agency.
And now you've stepped into a larger agency and you've grown that agency from being 20 to 40. Of course, anytime we grow, we have to look at how to maintain certain things. Culture is one of those big things, right? When you think about growing. And it sounds like there was a lot of that culture piece that was important to you and the values. What are some of the key things that you would share with the listeners who are thinking, my gosh, if I'm going to grow my team, whether that's from 3 to 5 or 5 to 10 or 10 to 15, whatever that is, what are some key things to really think about when you are growing your team and maintaining culture and maintaining vibe?
For sure. So I think from my perspective, I feel one of the things that has been successful is not losing sight of the people in the effort to grow and build efficiencies, because, that's, we can look at a process and we can say, oh, this is broken and this is how you fix it. But, what are the impacts of that on the people that are actually there, that are doing the work, those sort of undefinable things? Because as you grow, your people are your most important asset, especially in this world, in agency life. They're the product that you're selling, right? For the most part. So, you have to make sure that they feel valued and understood and that they're part of the process and that they're being heard. So that's one of the things that I think I would say is like, yeah, efficiency is great, but you kind of got to get the people on board too. And you got to make sure that they're being included in any improvements and any changes that you're trying to make as you continue to grow.
You can't run a service-based business without, good people in it. And so how do you help people perform at their best? And that's the question that a leader has to answer as they grow their team. It seems very natural for you because you are a people person. You ask yourself questions about how do you help your people become better at what they do and how do you help them excel? What are some of the areas you think have helped your people excel as we've grown from 20 to 40?
So I think the more people that we brought on, the more we understood that there's no one size fits all solution, which sounds obvious. But so I think one of the things that we do a lot of is spending the time to get to know the individual and the employee and what motivates them. That's one of my favorite interview questions, is just asking a person like, hey, it's winter and you don't want to get out of bed, like what motivates you to like go to work and do a good job that day? Because understanding what motivates people will help you be a better leader and a better manager. Understanding what their goals are, what their home life situation is like, really kind of helps me put them in the right direction, in the right role, inspire them to do the things that the business needs them to do so that both they as an individual and us as a business can grow and thrive together.
I'm all about the no one size fits all model for leadership. And I firmly believe that like in any given situation, you have to know the person that you're working with. And when you know their strengths, when you know their weaknesses, because let's face it, we all have weaknesses, and you know what motivates them, inspires them, that encourages them to be better and also do better. And I think at the end of the day, when you think about leadership is really one-to-one. Like we like to think that leadership is one-to-all, but really it's one-to-one because it's about helping one person to achieve, to succeed, to do better. And I love that you put it as it's not one size fit all. It really, really isn't. I'm curious, how has your leadership style changed to accommodate that growth?
So I think we can't do it all, right? So I think that's the other thing that's important from a leadership perspective is it's like, what is the sort of matrix structure of leadership that every individual employee is getting? I think I have a lot of value to add. I tend to work with employees specifically now, more so on their goals and their career development and on training. So that's one of the ways that I've sort of changed. It was more broad. It was about, do you have the tools that you need? Do you have the processes that you need? Like, do you have the things you need to do your job? And now it's transitioned more into, okay, well, what's next? Like, I know we've gotten to a point now where you have what you need, but what's the next step and where are you trying to get to? So that's what I focus on. But then we've placed other leads. So everyone sort of has different pillars of their leadership team based on what their role is and what their seniority is and what clients they work on. So there's that sort of like HR and operations pillar. There's a client pillar as well. So, what's going on behind the scenes at your client beyond just the projects that you're working on. And then the other one is like a subject matter expert in their field. Like, I can't be a lead to a developer because I don't know how to code. So, they need that sort of subject matter expertise if that's something that they're growing in and learning more about. So a senior member of the team that can support them in that as well. So I think knowing that I can't be all to everyone and sort of focusing on the bigger picture is how my leadership style has changed.
Ooh, it sounds like every person in your agency has their own little growth committee.
That's exactly it.
And that growth committee is dependent on the challenges, the strengths, and the projects that they're on. And when you do that, when you have a growth committee that looks different for everyone, you're diversifying the leadership load because it's not one person that becomes the go-to person. There is a different seat that a person takes, and whatever the challenge the employee is going through, they identify the right seat and they can speak to that person. And not only are they getting better support because they're getting the right type of support, but you're also expanding the bandwidth of your leaders because now it's not just one leader dealing with all the challenges of one person. You've got a couple of leaders in their own expertise supporting an individual. Tell us more about that. What inspired that type of support for your team?
So I think it kind of came out of our growth stories. When I first arrived in the agency, I used to joke that it was like 5 different agencies all sitting in the same room together because everyone was very divided with different ways of working and different processes on different clients. And we sort of knew that if we were going to continue to grow, we needed to sort of build teams and share resources and, really bring everything under one umbrella. And so I think that's where that idea sort of evolved. So I arrived and started helping people with, how are we going to get you to work across teams and understand other clients? But they needed to get to know a new client. And what was the best way to do that than to put them in a room and have them to connect with that new client lead and learn a bit more about that at that level. And so it evolved over time. We didn't have teams necessarily with managers and leads and things like that. So I think as we grew and we sort of split up into the current structure that we have now, we sort of recognized the need for people to have multiple people to talk to. And also, I think you go to different people inherently, like we do this in our personal lives too, right? Like you're going to call somebody different for different types of things and different types of problems and challenges. So just trying to replicate that back to like humanizing the workplace kind of thing. Like you have the opportunity to reach out to the leader that makes the most sense for the challenge you're having or the person you think is going to be the most receptive or the most helpful. So just wanted to make sure that everyone had that access to everybody.
What has been the response from your team as you changed your, I want to call it your leadership and team connection style? So I'm sure there was a transition point where there was a leader and direct report, right? That's typically the format, leader and direct report. And so when you switch to more of this growth committee concept, what were some of the feedback that you received?
So everyone was really receptive. I mean, I think there was an adjustment for some of the leads on the leadership team, obviously, because I kind of changed the scope of who they worked with and opened things up and said, hey, I'd now like you to talk to this person that maybe they had never had access to before or didn't really know much about. So, there was a little bit of an awkward moment where all of a sudden you have people talking that haven't really had much exposure to each other. But, once everybody got into it, like I think from the employees' perspective, I had nothing but great feedback because all of a sudden it opened up all these doors and gave them an opportunity to kind of learn something that maybe they would never have learned about or talk to someone that they wouldn't normally talk to. I mean, I think what employee doesn't want that, right? What employee doesn't want to have more access and more information and that bigger picture, right? Like, I think that's what gets lost. Like, agency life, you work hard and you're getting stuff out fast and timelines are crazy. And, it's nice to take a moment. And that's one of the things we try to stay true to is to make sure it's 30 minutes once a quarter with each of your leads is our process. And we try to space them out so every employee is getting a lead at least once a month so they don't go for long stretches without talking to someone on their leadership team. But we are not allowed to talk about projects. and status and updates and things like that, right? Like it's meant to be, a protected time to talk about the things that get lost, like training and development and learning and growth and things like that.
I love that. That really removes that corporate feel of having one person that you report to, and that person is typically the one that does your performance review and does your growth plan and does all those things. In this situation, you've helped people connect to each other at the human level, because the connections aren't necessarily about growth plans and aren't necessarily about performance reviews. They're connections with leaders across your business so that anyone can have access to them. And I think that's important for employees to feel and know. It's like, I'm not only meeting with a leader when I have a performance review or a challenge or whatnot. I have access to them on a personal level. And I really love hearing that. Any challenges that you faced when you were building out this kind of growth committee model in your agency?
Making sure that everyone's having those meetings, I would say, was probably one of the things. So you can set the structure and you can talk about it, and I can have a presentation, I can do an all staff, I can, give everybody a list of, oh, these are your leads. But, to make sure that those are happening consistently, I think is part of the challenge. But that's a change management problem, and it's always going to be there no matter what type of change you're trying to make. So that was one of the challenges when we rolled it out. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that was interesting is when you have that type of access that breeds that type of transparency opens up the door for some crucial conversations. So you might get some questions that if you weren't in the room one-on-one with someone, you probably wouldn't have got. And so how do you have crucial conversations? How do you give feedback properly as a lead or even as an employee? And how do you receive feedback? Humans, we're inherently bad at both giving and receiving feedback. So I think that's one of the things that we sort of put some effort into. We have some training on it for everybody now, but how do you give constructive, thoughtful, honest feedback? And how can you sit there and take it genuinely and take it away and think about it? So I think that was a challenge and a benefit in that sense, right? Like having those conversations was very valuable.
That's a great point. Just because you tap someone as part of a growth committee, that doesn't mean that person has the skill set to lead well in those conversations. And again, part of the work that you've done and the work that someone might need to think about if they're thinking of having growth committees in their business is how much training is required to help the person on your growth committee support your team in a productive way. I love how concrete you got. At the end of the day, leadership is about having great conversations, learning how to have great conversations, impactful conversations. And not everyone, I would say most people aren't born with that skill set. For you to really understand and see that as a barrier to making a growth committee work well is key. I think that also encourages people who are part of growth committees to engage and be more accountable and booking those sessions. Because I can imagine if you're part of someone's growth committee and you don't really know what to do, you don't have the motivation to jump into those calls because you might think, I don't know what to do in these calls. But once you empower someone with the skills and more confidence, it is more likely they'll stay accountable to making sure that their team gets those calls.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the other things that we did too is we don't put it all in the leads, right? Like I think a lot of these, we talk about sometimes needing to deprogram people when they're coming into the agency who might have been in a more hierarchical, you have a boss, the boss's boss, all these layers and things like that. But, we look at it as a mutual responsibility, probably more heavily weighted on the employee to come to these meetings and bring us your questions, bring us your problems. Like, what do you want to know? Obviously, the leads have things to share and stuff to give input to, but it can't be a one-way conversation. There has to be accountability and responsibility on both sides to make that a productive use of time.
If someone was listening to this right now and their agency was smaller, not 40 people, let's just say not even 20, let's just say 10 people, right? How would you suggest they leverage this concept of a growth committee within their agency?
So at 10 people, you're probably not going to have 3 pillars. It's probably going to be too much. I do think that everyone should have at least 2 people on their leadership team. So that would be my recommendation. And, the way that we started, and especially when you're small, you're going to have to give the employee a voice in who's on their leadership team. I think that's one of the important things. And we do that as people continue to grow, even with us, right? Like your leadership team can get stale. Maybe you want access to somebody else and you want to learn about another client or a different area of expertise, or, so I think talk to your employees, define what the purpose is of these meetings, not status. Let's talk about your growth and what we're trying to do as a company and how we can all do it better together, and ask them who they'd like to have more access to or be able to learn from or talk to. And then set a cadence that makes the most sense for your business and how quickly it moves and changes and how much connection you want to have with those employees.
Thank you. Those are some very tactical suggestions for a smaller agency, and very wise suggestions. In particular, this idea of giving people in your agency the option to choose the leaders they want to connect with. I think that's key, because when we give our team choice, they feel more motivated to do the thing. So, rather than saying to someone, look, you're going to get a growth committee and here's the 2 people in your growth committee, the reality is they might not be so interested in meeting one of those 2 members simply because maybe it's not an area they're interested in. Maybe, there's someone else they rather learn from. And I think that element of choice of saying, look, like if you look across your team right now, this is your opportunity to choose someone you really want to learn with and have a 30-minute one-to-one with them every 30 days or whatever that is. It's motivating because it feels like, oh yeah, I get to choose my path. I get to decide who I want to speak with and learn from. And the beauty of that is it also creates, in a smaller agency, deeper relationships. And I think the deeper the relationships go inside a business, an agency, I think there is better work that is achieved. Anytime we connect to people at the human level and understand each other's strengths, whether it's a leader to a employee or a colleague to colleague, we do better work simply because we know each other better. And I think that to me is the overflow that happens when we give people access to other people. I'm touching on also a point here that I want to dig into. And the point is this. I think that as you grow from a smaller agency to a larger agency, one of the challenges that presents itself is maintaining client relationships. So as your agency grew, how did you ensure the clients still feel the same level of personalized attention and care that they received when the team was smaller?
For sure. Well, I'd like to say, because of all the work that we put into building meaningful connections and keeping people happy, we have a really high retention rate. So most of our clients still have their original account person that they had. So there's this like anchor of representation from conversion and this deep level of like knowledge in that particular client. So I think retention helps a lot, especially on the account side when we're dealing with client service. We've had people come to us and they're like, yeah, my last agency, like I had a new person every 6 months and it just felt, like there was a bit lacking. So I think that's one of the ways that we keep them feeling important and prioritized, and obviously adding people to their team. And I think, with the cyclical nature of marketing and especially email, we're going to be high in some months and less in other months. And so, as we've grown that shared resource model, being able to tell our clients like, hey, you've got your core group of people, but we also have this other pool of resources that we can pull in that are part of the agency that understand your business. And, we have this core team that's going to make sure it's done exactly the way you like it, but we can kind of scale and grow for them as needed.
In your day-to-day right now, I know that you've taken on more of a COO role. How do you balance the need for process and systems with the flexibility and agility that is required when it comes to agency life? So when you're a small agency, you've got a lot more flexibility and agility. You can move faster, you can navigate faster. And then as you grow, in this case, 20 to 40 is quite a big growth. And as you grow, not to say that 20, you don't need process and systems. You do need process and systems, but as you grow, you need more. So I'm curious, how have you balanced that need for processes and systems with the need for flexibility and agility that comes with running an agency?
For sure. And they don't always go well together. They are kind of sometimes have competing values, but I think we really try to avoid process for the sake of process, and making sure that we're not trying to introduce layers. We're not trying to introduce blockers, because sometimes process can be seen as, oh, now I have these 3 extra steps that I have to take before I can get this campaign done. So I think we've focused a lot on what is the priority, at what parts of the process can we introduce more layers, and how do we sort of bring more people into that loop. I think we have a lot of autonomy still, even though we're 40. Each of our employees has a high level of responsibility and day-to-day sort of autonomy in the work that they get done. We use something called the decision process, where, anyone at the company is empowered to make a decision based on the advice that they get. So it's actually called the advice process. But, go out, talk to the people that you need to talk to. And if you think that's the best decision to make based on what information you've gathered from all this advice, go for it. Like, anyone's empowered to make a decision, because we don't want to have those blockers, but we have to make sure that they have the information that they need in order to make a good decision. And then how do you communicate that through to the rest of the people that are going to be impacted by the decision that they've made? So I think there is a fine line. You do need to know what the process is, but you also need to know what different paths you can take through that process depending on your particular situation. So it's not a one size fits all. Where can you contract and where can you expand as you go through that process, and what's acceptable?
Mm-hmm. That balance is the difference between being micromanaged and autonomy, where I think a lot of agency owners have fear, and rightly so, is that as their agency grows, they need more micromanagement to get things done in the right way. And I think what I hear you express is that, and I think this is really important, innovation doesn't come from micromanagement. Like there has to be an autonomy in decision making that also is part of a small agency vibe. Like a lot of small agencies do well because there is autonomy to make more decisions, but in order for a larger agency to have that innovation, to keep its people creative, the question becomes, how do you give them that autonomy with the right structure, with the right process in play? And I love how you just expressed, and if you could share that again, you called it the decision.
So it's the advice process, where basically you're empowered, but you can't just go rogue and make a decision that might have impacts elsewhere in the agency. So you kind of, and again, I think it ties back to that leadership structure, right? Like, we're giving people a lot of different access to think outside of just their one role at the agency, think bigger about the bigger picture and how everything is connected. So they know, oh, if I do this, maybe it's going to affect this person. And so why don't I talk to this person? And oh, maybe the client would have a thought on this. And so I'll talk to my client lead. And, just that ability to sort of, and the responsibility to speak up. Like, if you see an opportunity to improve or to do something differently or better, I want to hear about it, right? So we kind of put that back on the employees to say, hey, this is only going to be as good as we can all make it together. And so, so that's kind of one of the things we try. But I think just to layer on top of that, I think it's the checks and balances that are going to give the leadership team the confidence to let go a little bit of that micromanagement control. I get it. I love control too. I think we all do, and we want to know what's happening. But I think technology and tools have given us have empowered leaders a lot more to be able to understand what's going on. We use a hefty project management tool that everything happens within, for example, and Slack is great in our world as far as a communication tool. See what's going on. But so I think it's about having those checks and balances so that you're confident and everything is going the way you want it to be going, but letting the people do the work.
So given the idea that this is something that you need to introduce in your agency and keep people accountable for, what are some steps that you took to, number one, introduce, and number two, make sure people are accountable to making this happen on, the daily, weekly, and monthly?
Yeah, for sure. So we did formally introduce it. So, we did talk about it. It's something that gets reinforced as well by myself in all of my sort of one-on-ones that I have with everybody. But I think it's part of our onboarding process. So, every onboarding employee, whenever you're coming in the doors, like you get to meet with me and I get to tell you about all the expectations that we have of you. And one of them is that you will follow this process and you will make recommendations and that you have a responsibility to do it. I think we also reinforce it daily we do a lot of shout outs at Conversion on the all staff calls. So, shout outs for good work or somebody going above and beyond, but also, if there's a new process or a suggestion, just by kind of giving that person credit and kudos for, coming forward and suggesting it. So kind of creating that environment where you are accepting of change and suggestion. We try to approach everything with curiosity. So whenever someone comes to me with an idea, my first instinct is always like, oh, why is this important to this person? Right? Like, why do they feel like this is going to make a difference? Obviously, they're passionate about it. They've talked to people about it. They're coming to me to say, hey, let's make this change. And then sometimes I'll have a tweak or a suggestion. It doesn't always come perfectly, but I think for me, it makes my life so much easier. Don't come to me with just the problem. Come to me with your suggestion and your solution and that you've thought it through. So, I'll send people away if they come to me and they're like, oh, this is a problem. I'm like, great. How do you think we can solve it? Right? Kind of making them do that work. And I think that goes, again, back to that sort of like building connections and transparency and being open with your employees. So I think try to hold back that instinct to just say no, take it away, think about it, discuss it with some other people. Maybe there's something you're missing, right? Like, especially as you continue to grow, maybe you don't quite understand why that could be really beneficial. So if you have some hesitancies, I always just say thank you and take it under consideration and talk to some other people about it. And then you have to make sure you circle back though with that employee to make sure that you're telling them, yes, no, this is why.
Thank you, Victoria. I love how you've spent some time here sharing some secrets of your agency and how you've really maintained your culture. I love the idea of a growth committee. Now, I want to ask you something personal. Tell us a bit about your journey. How did you get here?
Well, if I go way, way back, I ended up in economics and psychology, which at the time were just things that were interesting to me. Little did I know that they would work very well for sort of marketing and advertising, but kind of landed my first job in this industry randomly, as sometimes it is. But, as I mentioned earlier, I was one of 13 people hired. It was an ad tech startup. It was a wild ride. We grew up to 80 at the time, and I sort of got to work through all of the different roles as that company grew, learn a lot about growth and digital and technology, and then sort of got that company to as far as I thought I could sort of get them as far as processes and things like that go. And then I wanted to learn a bit more about email because it was literally the only area of digital marketing that I hadn't gotten into and I hadn't experienced. And, I really did love that growth curve, that going from that small agency ad tech company into something much bigger. And I wanted to get on the ride again. So I was looking for a second round and decided that Conversion Digital was the place to do it. And yeah, it's coming up on 5 years that I've been there now and super happy to have been able to help them grow. And I see lots of good things in the future as well.
Amazing. Victoria, if people want to continue the conversation with you, where could they find you?
So on LinkedIn, you can look me up on LinkedIn, shoot me a message that way. You can also reach out to us through our Conversion Digital website. It's conversiondigital.ca.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Audrey. It was a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with me at the Small But Mighty Agency podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you hit the follow or subscribe button in your podcast app and share it with a friend. I'll see you on the next one.